Hello and welcome to this video. This video is going to be called Frank Zappa, the masterpiece that never happened. So what is Frank Zappa's masterpiece that never happened? Well, in 1977, after releasing a lot of albums, some of them very vast, epic albums, you think of like the 200 Motels double album, which was also the soundtrack to a film, Uncle Meat, another double album full of all sorts of different things, improvisation, modern classical experimentation, cheesy pop songs. Zappa had already released a number of really epic albums, but in 1977 he wanted to go one further, and he conceived a 4-disc box set called Lather, written Lather but pronounced Leather. And on this album he really wanted to, I think, make a statement that was bigger than anything he'd ever made before. This album was going to collect together all the different strands of his music making. There was going to be like the comedy stuff, the rock songs, the guitar solos, the experimentation, the modern classical pieces, all woven together and mixed together in one great big epic that was really at that time going to be a very big statement on the very nature of rock music at that point in time. So he goes to his record company Warner Brothers to release this album, and they won't put it out. They don't see it as commercially viable, and so he decides to try and, I think, get out of his contract by dividing this material up into 4 parts. And he delivered 4 albums, 1 double and 3 single albums. One of the albums, the live album in New York, right, was a collection of the live material, and Zappa did provide artworks and liner notes. But the other 3, he didn't provide any liner notes or artwork, he just delivered it. These albums got released, and they are now part of the Zappa discography. It's very strange with Frank Zappa because he had so much control over what he did artistically, that here we have a big chunk of his albums which are different, you know. He delivered this stuff to get out the contract. Well, apparently I think Warner Brothers then would not pay him for these 4 albums, and then I think that's when Frank set up Zappa Records and all that, and there's a whole period where there's a lot of albums where Frank is complaining about Warner Brothers in all different ways. Now, the fact that they'd ripped him off in such a way annoyed him. So I think on Halloween in 1977, I might be wrong, but I think on Halloween in 1977, he walks into a radio station and he plays the original version of Lather. This, of course, gets recorded by keen Zappa fans and appears as a bootleg. So we have this strange situation in the 1970s where Zappa's masterpiece, his masterwork, appears as a bootleg on 2 C90s tapes. After Frank Zappa died in 1993, the album finally saw the light of day, and I'll grab it here. So this, I think, came out in 1996. There it is, Lather, Frank Zappa. Now, of course, this wasn't pulled together by Frank. It was pulled together by the family. I think it's Simon Prentice and a whole bunch of people pulled this album together later. So we can't really say how much this was Zappa's original idea, but they did have those original bootlegs to go on. And this really is a monumental piece of work. On CD, it comes out as 3 discs, and we can see Zappa's original intention. It opens up with Egyptian Strut, which is a sort of orchestral rock fanfare in an Egyptian style, and it's an incredible opener to the album. This runs all the way through to the final track, which is The Adventures of a Gregory Peccary, which is one of Zappa's most epic tracks. It's a whole side long on the original album. And in between that, he goes through a voyage between live stuff, experimentation, guitar solos, orchestral things, jazz, all sorts of things. And that's what this album represents. But these albums in the 70s didn't come out in that form. Of course, they came out in a completely different form. me being a big Zappa fan, I bought those albums. So for me, I know the albums that came out in the 70s, and I just want to go through those with you now. So of course, the live stuff was all collected together. Now the point I'm making here is Zappa's original intention, it was that this live stuff would interweave in between studio stuff, but we end up getting it like this on Zappa in New York, all right? Which is a double album. There we go. There's the back. Right, and this contains some very important tracks. Now the thing is that when this album came out, there was then a furore around the track Punky's Whips, which is quite a sort of... it's about Terry Bozzio's obsession with the guitarist Punky Meadows from Angel. And I think Warner Brothers thought that this would offend. And so this album was pulled off, right, out of the shops. And then it was reissued without Punky's Whips on, right? This copy here I bought because I thought it was an original copy. If I just turn it round, you could see if it will focus. You're going to focus, there we go. So there's Punky's Whips on side one. But I think this is actually a bootleg copy of that original album. And I think I'll show you why. It looks like it's on Discreet Records, which was this label there. But if you could see the vinyl, right, there are no spaces in between the tracks. It just runs as one track. And doing a bit of research, that means that this as well is a bootleg album. I have it on CD as well. But we can see even with this, the power of this album being released again was curtailed by the situation. So all these albums sort of, they just sort of, how can I describe it? They never got out properly. Right, so we then move on to the other three albums. And I call these the Gary Panter albums because the artwork was all done by a comic artist called Gary Panter. Now I think he did a brilliant job. We're going to get into this because I think these albums are incredible, and it's strange because you have to realise that Zappa handed over these to Warner Brothers without any artwork or any liner notes. And these three albums would be Studio Tan, right? Sleep Dirt, and Orchestral Favorites. Now, this is quite contentious because I think these three albums contain some of Zappa's greatest music. I think they're absolute masterpieces. They shouldn't be because Zappa never conceived them in this way. What he did was to take the material that was going to go on Lather, and then he tried to group it. It was a complete opposite of what he'd planned with the release of Lather. So what he's done here is he's got all the live stuff and put it on Zappa in New York. He's put all the orchestral stuff and put it on this album, Orchestral Favorites. And then the rest of it, he has divided up between these two albums. And this one, Sleep Dirt, has a sort of, not overriding, but it has a more of a jazzy side of things. Whereas this one here has a little bit more on the sort of comedy pastiche, but it's got the epic Gregory Peccary. And I really want to talk about these three albums and try and deal with this. If we knew none of this, I would be holding up these albums and saying, these are three masterpieces by Frank Zappa. This is some of his greatest work. They're conceptually conceived brilliantly. The execution, the musicianship is incredible. It contains some of his best compositional work. And these albums, for me, are absolute masterpieces. All right? Let's just go through them. I think the weakest of the three is Orchestral Favorites. Now, we had heard Frank's orchestral compositions before. There's orchestral compositions on 200 Motels, for example. Later on the 80s, he did albums with Pierre Boulez. He did the London Symphony Orchestra albums. When you listen to those albums in the 80s, even though Zappa did employ revolutionary techniques to record those albums, they're not quite as revolutionary as this. And that may be what diminishes it here a little bit. I think this is the weakest of the three here, but I must say I prefer listening to this than I do the London Symphony Orchestra albums. This sounds like an orchestra, but it also sounds like a rock band. We've got Terry Bozzio on drums, I think, Tom Powell on bass, I'm not too sure. It's really hard to work out because on the vinyl we just have got no credits whatsoever. Right, but to my ears, you know, listening to this many times, it sounds like Bozzio on drums, and these are very, very orchestral. Now, on here we have Strictly Gentile, Pedro's Dowry. Pedro's Dowry is perhaps one of Zappa's most complex compositions. Those of you who love Zappa because of the complexity and the virtuosity required to play this stuff, I would say that Pedro's Dowry is probably the most advanced thing he ever wrote, and that is on this album. We hear it later on the orchestral albums, but here we hear it in... This is orchestral, but what's interesting from what I've read is Zappa recorded it. He really close-mic'd every instrument in the orchestra, so it's recorded multi-tracks like you'd record a rock album. Now, apparently, the London Symphony Orchestra albums were done the same way, but they're mixed in a much more holistic way. This is really recorded, you know, like a direct sound. We've got a full-on drum kit on here, and this rocks. And what's really interesting, and I think this is why I love this more than the London Symphony Orchestra albums or Perfect Stranger, is that on Duke of Prunes, Zappa actually picks up the guitar here on this one, and he does one of his best guitar solos. And that, for me, to hear Zappa working with an orchestra, working with a rhythm section, and then manipulating in electric guitar solos into the composition, I find really, really fascinating. But this is a slightly weaker album, but for me, this is a very important album in Zappa's oeuvre, because it's the first really definitive foray into orchestral composition for Frank. You know, there are no vocals on here. It's an orchestral album, hence the name, Orchestral Favorites. Now, if we move on to these two, right, Sleep Dirt and Studio Tan, we have, for me, two of his most iconic albums. Now, firstly, let's deal with the artwork. When Frank Zappa started to reissue his stuff on CD, he reissued these albums with this artwork. Now remember, this artwork was not provided or even conceived by him. Right? This is done by the record company. I originally bought this album because I'd bought an album by another artist. And back in the old days, you could, I don't know if any of these got this, but sometimes you could open up an album and they'd be all pictures from other albums. And I saw that. And I thought, oh my God, that album cover's incredible. I wanted to own this album cover. This is a fantastic, fantastic album cover. When the CDs were issued, I think they actually went back to Gary Panter and he provided more artwork. So there's a really strange thing going on with this. Zappa never intended these albums to be released in this way. And yet later on, he sort of justifies them. He what's the word? He authorizes them, you know. Now, later on, you get the choice. You now can buy Lather, or you can buy the album separately. The question is which is the more successful? And by the end of this video, I'm hoping to have got to an answer. But let's just go through these albums. This one here contains on side one Gregory Peccary, and Gregory Peccary is a sidelong epic. Vocals, but also incredibly composed. It's like a sequel to Billy the Mountain, which is off. Which one's it off? You see, this is what happens when you get older. It's not just another band from LA or Fillmore at the Fillmore. It's one of those. You'll tell me. It's the story of a little pig, a peccary, that invents the calendar, and he upsets all the hippies. He goes to see Billy the Mountain. He ends up talking to a philosopher who makes a very cryptic comment about time. I think Gregory Peccary is about time. It's about philosophy and time. It's one of Zappa's most heaviest conceptual pieces. Musically, it's one of his most heavily. It's incredibly played, incredibly composed. Basically, what I'm saying here is I think Gregory Peccary could well be Frank Zappa's finest moment. And on that one track, on that 20-minute track, he managed to do almost everything that he's known for doing. You know, right from the comedy stuff to the rock stuff to the studio experimentation to the orchestral composition. The only thing that's probably not on there is a guitar solo. Turn It Over, and it opens up with a very short but very snappy "Let Me Take You to the Beach." It's like a comedy song. It's like a pastiche of sort of 50s doo-wop. It's absolutely brilliant. It beats anything he did on Booming in the Depths. This is him at his best. This is another moment where if I had 3 minutes to try and explain what Frank Zappa is and play one track, it will be Let Me Take You to the Beach. Right? And then he has the revised music for guitar and low budget orchestra. This had already been released on the John Ponty album, where it was the revised music for violin and low budget orchestra. Which one do I prefer out of those? It's that one with Zappa playing guitar, and it's absolutely beautiful played, and it's just him in his orchestral setting, right? And then we finish with Redunza, which is a jam, right? That's the one thing we haven't had on here is a jam. It's just this here, to me, is one of Zappa's finest albums. And that's why I'm doing this video, because I wanted to talk about this. These are the albums that don't get mentioned. But is this not one of Zappa's greatest albums? Could this be Zappa's greatest album? That's the question. Sleep Dirt, this one here, is a little bit more jazzy, right? Filthy Habits is a really dark, crimson-y, Black Sabbath-y guitar solo. It could well be one of Zappa's greatest Zappa guitar solo extravaganzas. It's beautiful in 9/8 with this rolling dark riff going on. Flambe, Spider of Destiny. I think those two were originally going to be part of an opera that Zappa wrote called Hoochnatuk. Now, if I've got it right, these are the instrumental versions on here. When the CD came out, he added vocals, and I think I prefer the instrumental versions. Egyptian Struts, absolutely incredible piece. Which sounds like something off the Grand Wazoo, but it's better than anything on the Grand Wazoo. It's Zappa doing his fanfares. He's brilliant at fanfares, right? We Turn It Over. We have Time Is Money, which I think is another one of these Hoochnatuk tunes. We get it as an instrumental here. We get a little guitar solo thing called Sleep Dirt, and then we round off with The Ocean Is the Ultimate Solution, which is one of Zappa's great jams. It just goes on. There's an incredible George Duke solo on there, incredible guitar solo from Frank. It just burns. This is Zappa proving that he's one of the great jazz fusion artists. Now, you know, I've been doing top 10 videos recently, and this is what prompted me to do a video on Frank Zappa. And a lot of people have been going, you should have had Zappa in your top 10 fusion albums. Where's Hot Rats? Or you should have had Zappa in your top 10 prog albums. Yeah, the problem is he could be on both lists, couldn't he? He really could. And even then, he is beyond that. He is not on this list. It's the same with I didn't include Miles Davis on the fusion list. There's a reason why they're not on there, and it's not because they're not great enough. They're almost too great, right? Yes, it's a progressive rock band. Genesis, early Genesis, a progressive rock band. Zappa, no. He's something else. And the progressive elements, I mean, those progressive elements that Zappa has, he invented. You know, Freak Out could well be the first progressive rock album. Yeah, I get all that. Right, but when you buy a Zappa album, you may go for a whole side and have no progressive elements whatsoever. You know, you could go for a whole album with no fusion elements whatsoever, right? You know, in terms of here, which I think This is arguably one of the greatest progressive rock albums. But can you really call this progressive rock? Is this the same as Dark Side of the Moon? Is it the same as Close to the Edge? Is it the same as Thick as a Brick? I don't feel it. I don't know. But this is a masterpiece, right? These 3 albums is a masterpiece. Zappa in New York, that contains the Black Page, which has now gone down in history as being like the rock equivalent of Giant Steps. On Zappa in New York, you have that opening solo by Michael Brecker off the Purple Lagoon. Yeah, that is one of the finest moments in jazz fusion ever. Without a doubt, I get it all. I get it. Anybody who's been saying these comments on video, I get it. Right, so anyway, I'm gonna finish up there. I just wanted to show some love for these 3 albums, the Gary Panter albums. There they are again. Orchestral Favorites, Studio Town, Sleep Dirt. Which one do you go for out of these 2? I don't know. For me, even though it seems like it goes against Zappa's original intention, for me, it would be these. Right, hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.